In this video we're going to have a look at how we can modify spline tangents using the pen tool. So let's select the pen tool, and I'm going to select this point here, and now we can left click on one of the tangents and drag. And this is pretty much how the move tool works, with one exception. You can see that we're only changing the length of one of these tangents. However, we're changing the rotation of both of the tangents. One option we have with the pen tool that we don't have with the move tool is that we can have more than one spline point selected. So if I select both of these spline points, I can still tweak the tangents on each of these points without getting the erratic behavior that we experienced when using the move tool. And of course, when tweaking tangents, you can also hold down the shift key and break the tangents to modify only one of the tangents. And you can see we're getting the same problem that we had with the move tool. The tangents are no longer parallel to each other. So we can use equal tangent direction to fix that. Now let's have a look at a couple of more options that we have with the pen tool. You can see all of the options down here in the Attributes Manager, and we're going to talk about each of these quickly. By default, the type is set to Bezier, and this is the type you want to use if you draw or trace curved shapes like this one. The other important type is linear. You can use linear to draw blueprints for a building, for example. The other spline types that we have here are really not very useful for drawing accurate shapes, so we're going to ignore these. The next option we have is Edit Tangents mode. And what this does is it locks the position of all of the points on a spline, and it doesn't matter if they're selected or not. Usually if I want to move a point around, I would left click and drag to change the position of the point. If I want to prevent that from happening accidentally, I can check Edit Tangents mode. And now if I left click and drag on a point, I can't move it. What happens is that I immediately start modifying the tangents. The next option we have is the most important one and the most useful one. It's called Lock Tangent Rotation, and if I check that, I can select this point here, and I can left click and drag on this tangent, and I can even move my mouse away from the tangent, and all I can do is change the length of this tangent but not the rotation. So this is very useful because it allows me to accurately and easily modify individual tangents on spline points. And we don't have to worry about changing the rotation or about the tangents not being parallel to each other. The next option we have is Lock Tangent Length, and if I check that, I cannot change the length of the tangents anymore, but only the rotation. And if I left click and drag, I will change the rotation of both tangents. I can hold down the shift key and only change the rotation of one of the tangents, but I still can't change the length. The last option we have is Create New Splines. If you have a spline selected and you're in point mode, you can create a new shape that is not connected to the original spline, but it's still part of the original spline. You can see here in the Object Manager that we're not creating a new object. So it's still a single spline, but we have shapes that are not connected to each other. If you want to create a new spline, when you do that, you have to check Create New Splines. Now this will only work if you don't have one of the endpoints on the spline selected. If I select an endpoint here, you can see we're getting a connection to the pen tool. And even though this option is checked, we will continue this shape here, and we will not create a new spline. So if I deselect all the points here, I can now draw a new shape, and you can see in the object manager that we're getting a new spline. If we want to, we can connect this spline to the original spline by left-clicking on one of the endpoints. And now the two splines have been combined, the sequence has been reversed, and we are connected to the endpoint on the spline, and we can continue drawing the shape from here. You can also check combinations of these options. For example, if I don't want to move the points accidentally, I could check Edit Tangents mode, and I could also have Lock Tangent Rotation checked at the same time, and then tweak those tangents. Some of the combinations, however, do not make a lot of sense. For example, having Lock Tangent Rotation and Lock Tangent Length checked means that I cannot change the rotation or the length of the tangents, so that's not really very useful. What happens if I make this a little bit longer so we can see that, if I have both of these options checked, and if I left click and drag on one of the tangents, nothing really happens, because like I said, you can't change the length or the rotation. If you move your mouse over at some point, the tangents will be rotated 180 degrees. So now let's finish this spline shape. I'm going to use the pen tool, and I have Lock Tangent Rotation checked here. And what we can do is we can left click and drag on this tangent and maybe make this a little bit longer. And we could additionally select the point down here and tweak this tangent a bit. And obviously we have to rotate this tangent a bit, so I'm going to uncheck Lock Tangent Rotation. Now I can change both the length and the rotation of this tangent and line this up a little more accurately with the reference image. So I think the spline is now looking pretty nice, and in the next video I'm going to show you how we can test the spline shape to make sure it looks good, and then we'll continue and finish this gap spline.